Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming in this morning. So the title of this conference is Transforming Health System Resilience into Health Reform, and this is the second seminar of the Restore project. My name is Colin Doherty. I'm the head of the medical school in Trinity, and I'm delighted to be invited by Steve Thomas to open the proceedings. So Steve, as you know, is the Edward Kennedy Professor of Health Policy and Management, and he's the principal investigator of the Restore project, which is a 1.4 million funded, HRB funded project. We're now about halfway through the project, and this is the second annual conference. And we're here to launch the Presto report, which you'll hear about regularly during today's proceedings. So we're here today to discuss bring national and international experts on healthcare policy and reform to give varied perspectives on health system resilience, particularly in relation to COVID-19, but also economic shocks, both prior and present and possibly future as well, and the implications of these for the health system, for health system reform. And there'll be talks from the European Observatory on Health Systems by one of our keynote speakers, Ewout van Ginneken. Hopefully I did pronounce that correctly. And also from the London School of Economics from Charlotte Johnson Webber. And of course, the fantastic team that Steve has brought together on the Restore project, Catherine O'Donoghue, Ariana Amirali Sanchez, Porrick Fleming, and Lisa Farsi. So the most important thing we're doing today is launching the Presto report. So if you haven't got a copy, please pick one up. And it brings together the findings so far, if you like, but it is a complete piece of work in and of itself. And we hope and expect that this will be a template for future reform and a manual for surviving future shocks to the health system. I want to say, just before I finish, a couple of words about how important the health policy and management unit is to us in the school. And I'll illustrate this by a little story. So I still call myself the new head of school. Somebody's going to say to me one day, you can't say that anymore. I don't know at what point I'm allowed to stop saying I'm new, but I feel new still. But I'm only going to say this obliquely so people won't be able to identify them, but there's a group of researchers in school, very, very, very high quality researchers, scientists predominantly, who were having a strategy day. And so that was fine. I said I should go to the whole day. I was invited to talk, and the idea was that at lunchtime I would give a talk about the school strategy and how it interacts, maybe intersects with the strategy for this group. And I said, I'll go to the whole day, just get a feel for the whole thing. So I go in at 9 o'clock and I'm speaking about one, and person after person presents this, like some of it was astonishing scientific data, but the word strategy wasn't used once, and I had that feel of if everything is, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. They were just researchers and they were showing their research work. So I said, Uncle, I'm going to tackle this question of strategy now at lunchtime. But before the lunchtime speakers came on, before me, there was a member of a funding agency standing up to talk about health funding research. And she talked broadly about the challenges of health funding and research funding. And somebody from the audience said, we need to fund, we need more funding in research. And somewhat embarrassingly, and he said, we're being funded like a third world country, which is really kind of disrespectful comment, I think, really an outrageous comment to say that about Ireland's funding. But nonetheless, he said, we're being funded like a third world country. I mean, she was very respectful, and she said, look, here's the problem. We have the government who's got a lot on its plate. It's got the A&E crisis, the bed crisis, and trying to get the funding of research into that list of priorities is very difficult. And everybody just nodded. So I stood up, I said two things. I said, first of all, I haven't heard the word strategy here mentioned once, except, a concerted strategy to undermine the funders who've attended this meeting. But secondly, I said, what is it about the health system crises, inverted commas, A&E, beds, integrated care, that none of these exceptionally brilliant people in the audience think they have anything to say about? Why is that not something that we are concerned about fixing? Now, you know where I'm going with this. You can't stop these people in this unit of health policy and management from sticking their noses into the real problems we have in the health system. And that is brilliant. That's what we should be doing. We need the government to be looking to the university, to the academia, to help solve the problems. We want to be a partner, and that's exactly what the history of the unit with Steve and Sarah and the rest of the team have been doing. You know, and I really applaud them, and it's a really important part of what the school does to be part of the reform of the health system and to work. And I'm delighted that the HRB and the Department of Health are here, various representatives, because we are genuinely interested in helping you with these problems, and everything that's in this report and everything that Steve and the team do is about helping health system reform. So, Steve, why aren't you doing more macrophage research? That's what I want to know. No, I'm joking. I'm going to hand over to Steve now, and we'll get the proceedings going.
Great. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thanks so much, Colin, for that lovely introduction. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Yeah, this is an exciting day. We got here at last, team, well done. And I just want to start off by, thanking my team who are, oh, I need to click on, don't I? There we go, how does that work? Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go, there we go. I need to start by thanking my team for all their support for today, making things happen. Padraig, Liz, Catherine, and Ariana, they've worked tirelessly for today, and I'm sure there'll be lots of interesting discussions and things that we can bring from today. So this is as Colin said, it's our second annual seminar, and really the key theme today is really talking about this. Not just resilience, but how resilience links to change. How health system resilience helps us to think about what kind of change works and what kind of change can improve our health system, whether that's small changes or whether it's thinking about things like Sláinte care. And it's the nature of the interaction between a resilient health system helps bring reform forward, but also reform helps build resilience too. So it's looking at that interactive dynamic between the two. So what I'm going to be doing today then quickly is just to give you a bit of background on the Restore project, on the different components of it. As Colin said, it's a 5-year project starting in November 2020, looking a little bit about the outputs, what have we done so far, because we're almost halfway through, almost probably just short of 2.5 years in. So it's quite good to reflect and think about where that's going. And so what are we doing? Then, importantly, come to the Presto report that we're going to be launching today and give you some of the ideas and the processes behind that. And then finally, I'll do a quick walk through the agenda for today. Okay, so Restore logic and sequencing. So what is the kind of project all about in terms of its research focus? So really the overarching, if you like, conceptual framework behind it is this, is what we call the shock cycle. And this is something that I developed along with the European Observatory for a health policy brief that we did in 2020. And we were looking at shocks and how do you manage them and what are the different stages that you need to go through. And basically any health system that is resilient needs to be able to manage the shock onset, it needs to be prepared for the shock, manage the shock onset, deal with the shock management, and then afterwards pick up the pieces and look at legacy and learning from that. So that was the sort of, the underlying kind of logic of where we were approaching Restore from. And basically our first goal then, our first phase, our first component of the project was to look at resilience measurement. Now, initially when I designed the project, it was all going to be about Brexit. And then COVID hit, so it's like, oh my goodness, whoa! But that actually proved to be a boon, really, because we got very much into looking at that, and that's in essence that's what the Presto report is all about: resilience in an Irish context. Then the next phase, which we've started, but we're going to be majoring on, is to think about, well, within that context of shocks, how do you take forward reform? How do you take forward a big reform program like Sláinte care? But how do you take forward reform programs at all, big reform programs? So we're doing some work now that Padraig is leading on an international a realist review looking at international comparative policy development. How do you do it? What are the forces that change and guide policies as they move forward? How do they get changed, and where is that good and where is that bad? And then at the same time, if you like, undergirding both the discussions around resilience and discussions around reform, we need to look at our workforce. Because really, if we haven't got an engaged, resilient workforce, if they're not well motivated and protected, that's both going to undermine how we manage the shock and actually how we take the reform forward. So Arianna will be presenting some initial work that we've done around workforce engagement today, because that's quite a key component to this. And then the final phase of the project is where we do some blue sky thinking at the end. We try and pull this together and try and look again at fresh ideas around health system resilience. So there's lots going on there. Okay, what have we done so far? So this is our kind of like, you know, screen grabs of our 8 international peer-reviewed publications that we put together in the Lancet, Health Policy, International Journal of Health Policy and Management, etc., etc. I'm particularly pleased about our 2 reviews, the realist review that we did on international health system austerity and its impact on workforce. I think that's incredibly important, because as we move into a cost of living crisis, understanding how to best protect our workforce in that kind of circumstance is really important. And then also we did a systematic review on looking at how countries have measured and understood resilience over the last 20 years. That's going beyond COVID. That's quite also important. In terms of our international presentations, one of the wonderful things about COVID, and that's not often a sentence that I actually say, but one of the wonderful things about COVID was actually it allowed us to be much more international, because we could sit in our bedrooms and talk to Helsinki and talk to Florence, which we didn't get to go to. That was a bit of a downer. But actually, you know, but it did give us a lot of international reach, because everyone's very keen and thinking a lot about these kind of problems. So we've done all kinds of presentations all over the globe. We did get to go to Toronto and Berlin and Brussels, so I'm not going to complain too much. But so lots of international outreach, and I think that we're trying to, you know, foster this international discussion of what is the best way to keep protecting and preserving our health system performance during shocks. Other kinds of engagement, we're involved with policy dialogue with the Swedish government on private health insurance. I recently did an interview with BBC Scotland looking at health system design. I know that the Scots are rather unhappy with their health system at the moment. They're wondering at looking at different ways of learning, whether Ireland can be a useful test case, and Ireland's own experience of Sláintecare can be a useful test case. And we're also looking at resilience network development through an international body, through Geneva. And then on a national level, and this is where my colleague Sarah Burke has been pioneering lots of really interesting engagement through her Foundations project. We've had a presentation to the Oroptus Committee. We've had, and we are having regular presentations to the Department of Health and HSE. And I've also been quite closely involved in the development of the Health System Performance Assessment Framework, which is really good in terms of bringing together lots of data and utilizing that to manage system performance and think about where we need to go strategically. I think that's a very important strategic tool. And I know Greg Dempsey from the department will be talking to us later, but he's been very instrumental in leading that charge. Okay, and then the other thing that we're also involved with at the moment is developing a handbook for Edward Elgar, a handbook on health system resilience and developing global thinking. And the map over on the left is basically the countries where our authors are all coming from. And I'd like to point out to you over here, that is Taiwan. Which you might have missed, or China, depending on your geopolitics, but you can tell my geopolitics because I haven't coloured that in red. So Taiwan is in there, talking about bird flu. which was quite interesting because, so, and there's a whole range of different topics that we're looking at there. We're looking at the theory of health system resilience, because that's quite an interesting contested space right now. People are thinking about perma-crisis, people thinking about everyday resilience, and the challenge of just being in any health system, never mind whether you've got a shock. We're looking at health system functions like financing and governance, trying to do some of the international health comparative analysis of resilience, which is quite tricky. And I know George will be talking to some of that today, and I'm hoping Evan will too. And then learning from different shocks, from COVID, from the economic austerity, from natural climate disasters, and then looking forward and learning lessons. So we've got 21 chapters done, so we're well on the way, and I'm hoping to have a workshop and hopefully the publication done by the end of 2023. So that's in essence, that's quite a lot of of what we've done so far. So doing well, but we've still got more than half to go. So I'm kind of excited about that. I want to now just then turn and dig in a little bit to the whole Presto report and what's it all about. And because this is a very exciting day, it's been quite a while in the process. You always take these things on and you think, yeah, it'll take us a couple of months. And it never does it? Doing a whole report like this. So I think, and the way we've done the Presto report is slightly different from some of the other case studies in the series. So this is a unique collaboration between the Restore project and the Partnership for Health System Sustainability and Resilience, which is led out of LSE, and we have some key partners also in the audience today. Unlike in other countries, we haven't actually taken private funding to do this, but we have had some very good private collaboration and technical expertise, which has fed into the process. And so I want to call that out and say that's been really useful. So we've had both public technical expertise and private sector technical expertise. And the aim of it is really to get under the bonnet, to look at health system resilience and sustainability, and with a certain emphasis on the COVID period, but not exclusively that, because I think you have to look broader. You have to think broader, what's going on in the health system, what are the key factors. And so we're looking at the 7 domains here. The first 5 are more traditionally to do with health systems, around governance, financing, human resources, etc. And then we're looking at population health and environmental sustainability. So it's a very broad-ranging report. And I couldn't possibly do justice to it all, but I'll be presenting some of it. And also Catherine, then my colleague, will be presenting highlights in a bit. And a huge variety of different sources we use for that, as well as some primary interviews with key informants. And so the Presto process, which I think is important to note because it has been such a collaborative process, it's unusual to be so collaborative in our research, but I think it's certainly sharpened the product quite well. And I was slightly afraid of the process when I started. I thought, where's this going to go? But actually it landed quite well in the end. So we did quite a few background papers around Easter last year. We then convened an expert group that met twice. And the expert group, the names are 15 people are over on the right there. Thank you for all those people who've inputted their time into thinking about, well, what should the focus be? What are the topics that people are worried about? And then when we were able to present and draft the report, they then came back and said, maybe I like this, I'm not sure about that. So it got us to reflect again and think about where we're going and what are the big strategic issues for the health system. So it's invaluable having that breadth of opinion coming into the report development. We then went through international peer review, which is always joyful, before we got to the document finalization fairly recently. And some of the very smart copy editing and publication support that was offered from the LSE. So thank you for that. Okay, so we've got a 100-page report. We've got executive summary, and I'm now going to do it in one slide, okay? Boil down the findings. I think the culinary term for this is jus. You boil something down, concentrate. Okay, here's my jus. Okay, so I'm going to use the sort of idea of the shock cycle, preparedness, shock onset alert, shock impact and management, and recovery and learning. So we vaguely use that. So how did we do? Pre-COVID preparedness? Pre-COVID preparedness, not as good as it really should have been, perhaps. We kind of perhaps walked into it a bit. We had quite limited bed capacity. As a result of austerity, we never perhaps picked that up again. We had, although staff motivation was starting to pick up a bit, I think there was still a lot of legacy issues from the austerity years. I think there was probably a lack of specific pandemic planning. Talking to one of the former heads of the HSE, saying that there was crisis planning, but not necessarily specific pandemic planning. IT deficiencies, there wasn't universalism, which we know is very resilient for a health system. So not as great. COVID response, but given that not great start, actually the COVID response was generally pretty good. So a lot of money went into the system, and money not just for handling COVID, putting up test and trace, vaccination, you know, there's a lot of things going on. And the system showed a lot of flexibility and a lot of resourcing into that, which was great. And actually building parts of Launch Care that hadn't been built before, building some of the capacity issues that related to the initial design of Launch Care back in 2017. Quite low excess mortality by international standards. Ireland comes out as one of the better performers internationally. And government's not perfect, of course, but we all know, you know, Pat Kenny highlights this mistake and that mistake. But actually, in general, the governance was pretty good. As I say, increased universalism. And then in terms of the legacy issues, and there's a mixed picture here. And of course, we're only starting to understand what the legacy issues of COVID are now. Of course, we've got very long waiting lists. We went in with fairly long waiting lists, although they were coming down a bit. We know about burnout. We've seen that the turnover rates are quite high now. You know, getting up to sort of 10%, 12% for some categories. But at the same time, there's more of an innovation culture been built into the health system in some ways, and of course a completely different funding platform, which I think bodes very well for the future, as long as you can keep holding on to it. So I would say, you know, B+ for COVID response, pre-COVID periods, I think we were caught a little bit there, you know, and on legacy issues, I'm not going to mark that one yet because we haven't finished. So we'll see how that goes. So that's my boiled down findings. Okay, so I'll probably get scoriated for that later, but there we go. And then what's next? Okay, so you know, here we go again. Just when you thought it was safe to get back into the water, you know, here comes another shark. So we're into permacrisis. We're into hot on the heels of COVID. We have a war in Ukraine. We have migration problems. We have cost of living crisis. We may even be about to have a banking collapse. Who knows? But it looks much more like an economic shock. Okay, so what, you know, as Alan Bennett defined history, one effing thing after another. And that's what we seem to be facing here. So here we go again. And so I think it's then a challenge to how we think and how we operate resilience in that kind of context when you don't have any breathing space, when you don't have any chance to sit back and in like that fourth stage of the shock cycle, legacy and learning, think about what you're going to do. Oh, let's think about, you don't have that luxury anymore. But the one thing that I would say that I think is encouraging is that I think COVID revitalized Launch Care. In fact, I would say COVID actually resurrected Launch Care, if I could be a bit cheeky, because I think it showed people how important health reform was, because if you haven't got a health sector, then your economy is in trouble, and that's what COVID taught us. And I think the cost of living crisis might also help Launch Care, because what better justification for free care than in the middle of a cost of living crisis, when people are having to choose between paying the electricity bill or getting food in or whatever it is. So I think it's an important thing to ask whether we can leverage the cost of living crisis then to help us with Launch Care. So, question: resilience and reform, the best of friends. Maybe they're bestos. Okay. And Launch Care, I always like to say, was born out of a shock, was born out of austerity. People had had enough. We need to fix the health system once and for all. Reinvigorated by shock through COVID. Suddenly, woof, all these resources coming in. And yes, we're going to prioritize that. And maybe it's required for a shock, because we actually need a good, well-functioning health system to get ourselves through the cost of living crisis for our workforce, who need protecting, and also for patients and the public. So I think the shots can be leveraged for reform, but I think it takes smart governance to do it and seizing the opportunity. And I think Ireland did that pretty well during COVID. The question is, can it do it with the cost of living crisis? Okay, blah, 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 blah. That's enough about me yakking. You'll hear more from me later on the panel. I just want to quickly go through the agenda for today. So we're going to have the first session just now, focusing on some of these key issues from COVID to cost of living crisis. We're going to be talking about international reflections on what's happened in Europe. Then we'll have Catherine bringing highlights from the Presto report, so digging a little bit more into some of the stuff that I've been mentioning, giving her taste. She can't cover everything, but I think you get some interesting stuff. Then Arianna will talk about workforce engagement and some of the data that's coming out of the HSE European Count surveys, which I think is really interesting, just to monitor what are the factors that actually influence engagement. Then we'll have Q&A in the coffee break. That's all under Padraig Fleming's chairing that session. In the second session, Dr. Sarah Barry, formerly of this parish, from RCSI will be chairing, and we'll have the second keynote from George on lessons around case studies. So there are quite a few other countries that have done a similar process, and it'll be interesting to see what they bring us. And then finally, Liz we'll be talking about using crisis as catalysts for change, which is coming back to this whole thing about reform and resilience. Are they the best of friends, really? And then we'll have a panel discussion to end up, and appreciate Professor Sarah Burke, Director of the Centre for Health Policy Management, chairing that. And that'll be really interesting. Our international speakers, Greg Dempsey, Deputy Secretary General from Department of Health, and Dr. Margaret O'Riordan, former ICGP President, along with me, chatting through some of the issues from today, giving some reflections on today, and hopefully we'll be able to round things up there. And then finally, and most importantly, our funder. Always give the last word to your funder. That's such an important lesson in life. So thank you so much to Annalisa Montesanti for coming from the HRB, and we look forward to hearing from her. And then there will be lunch. So please don't hurry away, because we spent good money on lunch, and and you've earned your free lunch. As any economist will tell you, you've earned it. Okay, so I will finish there. Thank you very much. Oh, and just to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to the people for hosting us today, for Tangent, to the caterers, for Ali and Veronica for doing this stuff up front, and for the team and everyone here. Thank you.